Welcome to the Filmmaker Mixer Podcast, the podcast by filmmakers for filmmakers. My name is Andrew, and I'm joined alongside my co-host Jeff, as always. Jeff and I are writers and directors and passionate about the art of storytelling. Filmmaker Mixer is a creative hub where aspiring and established filmmakers come together to share experiences, insights, strategies, and inspiration.
Hello, everybody. This is the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, and today we are chatting with our friend Trevor Hoffmann. The great thing about this show is when you have repeat guests, you get to know them a little bit better every time, and so I'm excited to have Trevor on again. Our last show with him was great fun. So, Trevor, welcome.
Thank you. I'm honored to be asked back.
Well, on the last show, we were talking about composing for film, and we got into video games a little bit. And we thought, man, we should do a deep dive just on video game composing soundtracks. So that's what we want to chat about tonight. So I guess just for some context for the listeners who maybe didn't see the last show, just give us a little brief pitch on yourself and what you do.
Yeah, I'm a composer. I've been writing for film and TV for many years, and in the past 3 or 4 years, I have delved more into the video game world, which is what we're hoping to talk about today, a bit more in depth.
So just also for context,
Mhm.
what's the biggest difference between composing for film and composing for video games?
Yeah, well, in one word, I would say interact, just the interactive portion of it. Linear TV, you're given a locked cut. Hopefully, it's locked, and you can write to it and fine tune every single moment. Whereas video games, everything is dynamic, or most things are dynamic at least. And so your writing and your music has to be adaptive to so many different things. And one of the challenges is setting a tone for a scene. So imagine you're on a beach exploring caves and things like that, and you need to write a piece of music that is interesting for 10 seconds, but also is potentially interesting for 10 minutes if the character is just wandering around. And that's some of the biggest challenges. Because that's something you could finely tune in linear, but in interactive, you're dealing with changing things where characters might be doing this for 10 minutes and then, or they might just be doing this for 1 minute and then go into, a different section of the map, or decide they want to go on the pirate ship or whatever it is, and then things change. And just writing music that is adaptive to that.
So I'm curious about something. When you say you have to have a piece of music that can go short or go long, do you have to build in breaks where you could get out of that piece quickly and it makes sense, or you could stay in that piece and go longer? I mean, how do you write to make those short versions versus long versions, or do you just write different versions of it?
Sometimes you write slightly different versions of it, but one of the main mechanisms to do that is you write a piece of music, and then when things change, you have a transition piece of music, and so you'll have
And
this track,
and that's a
yeah,
separate piece.
and that's a separate piece, yeah. And so you
Interesting.
have this, you have a track that could be, a minute long, could be 5 minutes long, and that will just, if you're in the same area of the map, it'll just loop and loop and loop, and that's fine. But if you move into something new or something gets more intense, sometimes you'll have a simple crossfade, but a lot of times you'll have a piece of transition music. The simplest version of this is like a cymbal swear where it goes like shh, and then you're in a different piece of music. But that's a bit of a cop out, and usually you want to do something that's a bit more musical in many cases. And so you have like a transition bar. Sometimes it's like a big hit, or like maybe it's a harp gliss with some other things going on, and that'll launch into a new section in a musical way that feels like it was written that way. And in the middleware we were talking about earlier, you can actually do that where you lock things into the beats. And so it's not just happening at a random part of the bar. You can say, okay, this gets triggered, and then after 2 beats, it hits this transition piece of music, and then it goes into the next piece of music. And that's the joy of the middleware as well, is that you can do things like that. And so it seems like it was written that way, but there's actually a lot of craft that goes into it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, how do you handle creating all those different themes? And then how many, I mean, I'm sure it's different for every game, but how many
Mhm.
different pieces of music are we talking about?
It depends on the length of the game. There's
Right.
some A lot of the games that I'm working on are, some of them are small in scope, and the interactivity is quite simple, and so you're writing themes that aren't that long and aren't that complex, and then other games, that I haven't worked on a AAA game at this point, but I look at some of my buddy composers, they work on those games, and that's 80 hours of content that they're recording sometimes, and there's
Wow.
so many different themes in that. So there's a huge spectrum of to answer that question. Yeah.
And how do you, I think we touched on this last time a little bit, but how do you track all of that data that you're creating? So, yeah, I mean, it's got to be an enormous amount of information.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of it just gets stored in the good old noggin. But having a great editor and a good library system is integral. Even in TV, the TV world, having a library system that you can rely on and that is labeled properly, it's huge. And also themes that you can circle back to. So if you have it stored in your library and this is the snowman theme or the dragon fireball theme, you can go back and recall that instantly with a good library system. But again, it comes down to having a good editor who knows how to label these things, and then just remembering all these different themes because
And
it is a lot, yeah.
is there like an industry standard for how you organize the libraries, or is it just up to each individual?
I'd say each individual. There are a couple programs that are really great. Sound Miner is one that we've been using forever, and then the other one that I just started using recently as well is called Soundly, and it's just what you'd imagine, where you can import audio cues, and then you can label them, add metadata to them, and they'll be searchable in that way. And then you can, use them if you want to edit them back. There's great functionality that you can search it, find what you're looking for, get the whole queue or even part of a queue, hit a key command, and then it pops it right in your workstation.
Is it like Frame.io? We use that a lot, where you can get notes from other team members. They can go in and listen to the piece, and does it track that as well?
Similar, yeah, yeah. It's a similar types of metadata where it's just all very functional, and you can recall things very easily. So yeah, similar to that.
Interesting. Well, let's jump into the creative process. So you're brought onto a game.
Mhm.
What's the first thing that you do?
Oh man, I mean, it the Nurture, for example. Nurture is one of the games that I'm currently working on, and it is it's an episode by episode game, and
What is it? I'm sorry. Explain that. What do you mean exactly? Episode by
so
episode.
Nurture is a learning-based game aimed at mainly younger children, and it's very educational, and you're fostering great traits and kind of the EQ in the next generation. And they have sort of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Roblox, but Roblox is another type of video game where it's basically like a sandbox with different games within this platform. And Nurture is similar to that. And they have these different levels within their platform. And so each level is an episode basically. And in this case, when I start with each one of these games, I'll have a conversation with the directors and the game designers because often they're the same team, but they're different departments within the team. And that's another big difference between linear TV episodes and video games and games in general is that you have bigger teams in video games often. And not necessarily the bigger teams, but more departments because instead of just working with a sound effects guy and a re-record mixer like you would on TV, in games you have level designers that you need to talk to and people who are programming cutscenes and designing levels, and then the director and the art direction, and then the overall game director and game audio director. So you have all these different teams who are, you collaborating to figure out what's going on. And so to go back to your question, when you start on a video game, it's largely talking to these different departments and finding out what their priorities are. So if their priorities are just setting a mood for the entire level, or if within a level we need to make sure that we hit this certain point when something dramatic happens. If there's sound effects to deal with, a lot of times we'll need to talk about the key that we're writing the track in because maybe there's like chimes that are going on in the background from a church or something like that that you need to work with. And so the first thing would just be talking to all these different departments at a high level before you even dig in. You get the big picture and already start to get ideas of like the artwork and the characters and the levels and the whole scope of the thing.
And so those conversations are guiding you on like tone and the musicality that you're trying to create. Is that how big, how small, how emotional is that what these conversations lead to?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the initial conversations are largely big picture, understanding how the tone exactly what you're saying, how the tone of the music is going to be, what are the important points to hit. And after those initial conversations, that's when you start to go from big picture into more of the minutia and going back and forth with, different parts of different levels, or if you're in a boss level, for example, understanding exactly what's happening, how many layers of music we need to hit, if there's going to be like victory music or defeat music at this point and how that integrates and when that all hits. So big picture, then breaking it down into just a lot of smaller pictures after that.
Makes sense. So I'm curious about something else creatively. When you're creating a theme for a
Mhm.
character or a scene, I'm assuming that you create offshoots of that theme to use in different parts of the game.
Absolutely, yeah. It's that's another magical thing that I love to do in video games is where you can take the themes and you can do so much with it. I mean, obviously in linear music you can do that as well, but in games you have even more opportunities to be interactive with that theme, and sometimes, themes can take on a life of their own within different levels because there's different branches that the theme can take. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities for development of that theme. And one thing about Nurture is that it's not just themes for different characters. There's also a lot of learning themes. And with Nurture, because it's a learning based game, that is really important to the creators and myself as well. Because one of the main goals of that game is to help kids learn. And music in games is a really important part of that as well, because a lot of times you can highlight moments through music in a much more obvious way and help the kids realize what's going on, and then, make it fun for them as well. So in Nurture specifically, because it's a learning based game, there's a lot more learning themes, and that's something that is developed throughout and is a huge tool. I mean, not just in kids games, but in, Sonic branding for Coca-Cola or McDonald's, they all have their themes that when you hear that, you're like, oh, that's McDonald's, or, or whatever the brand may be. And similar in the game, when there's a learning moment, I have learning themes so that the kids are like, oh yeah, this is a learning moment. I should be paying more attention to this. And so in Nurture specifically as a game, that's something that is a bit more unique to it since it's a learning game.
So how do you balance the music with, say, sound effects that are going on?
Hmm.
How do you work with that team and decide, hey, the sound effects are going to do the heavy lifting in this moment and the music's going to do the heavy lifting in this other moment?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's always a bit of a battle. Not I shouldn't say always a bit of a battle, but it's definitely a major consideration because there's only so much sonic space in a mix. So for video games, it's much more dynamic because as opposed to linear, again, where everything is fixed, you have a re-recording mixer who's taking all the effects, all the music, and is able to sit there for days if needed to meticulously craft like how this effect is going to go on. With video games, that's all dynamic, right? And so if you're a character in there and you're like, punching a wall or like, shooting a cannon or something like that, those effects are going to happen at different moments depending on what the game, what the player is choosing at that time. And the music, because of that, needs to be much more subtle in a way, in a lot of levels. And the middleware, which we discussed a little bit last time, has a large part to do with that. And so without going into the weeds too much, the middleware is able to actually like duck the music a lot. So you can write like a pretty intense track, but it will actually get the who's ever doing the programming. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's the audio team. Will actually program it so if there's a big explosion, it'll actually duck the music
Oh,
so
interesting.
that the music is able to like be kind of like loud and intense and in your face, but then it doesn't get too loud if there's another explosion going on. And in a linear piece of music, that would be done manually by the re-recording mixer usually. But because everything's happening spontaneously in a video game, that's something that's actually programmed, and you can program that to duck it and or compress it or whatever needs to happen for those different moments. So that the short answer to your question is it's quite complex to balance all that, but there's a lot of really neat tricks, and the software these days are very helpful for that.
It's just magic. It's just
Yeah.
so. Does the soft? Can you program it also to do certain layers of music? In other words, if something's going on, it'll play only certain tracks of the music as opposed to it does that as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's
That
one of
is
its main functions, right? Because as you're traveling through a world in a video game, maybe you're going from a beach area where everything's tropical and fun, and then you're going into this cave where things are a little bit more magical and mystical or something like that. And you don't want to have a situation where the player is, waltzing through the game and all of a sudden just this like hard stop with the music and then a new track starts because it takes you out of the immersion of the
right.
game. Right. And that's, again, I think we talked about this in our last time, an immersion in the world is a huge part of our goal as composers. And so instead of having this like hard stop and a new track start, there sometimes is like really, really subtle crossfades. And so it'll be, you kind of in the middle where you'll have these two tracks playing simultaneously that are, have the same beat but only the tropical one will be playing. And then as you go from the beach into the cave, the tropical one will come down and the mystical cave spooky music will come up. And you won't even really notice it in many cases because it's so seamless. And that's what middleware does, is you're able to stack these different tracks on top of each other and have these seamless transitions. And that's a very simple example, but there's much more complex examples as well, depending on how complex your video game is.
Well, let's talk about middleware again. Explain to the audience what that is and how you use it.
So middleware, some of the most popular middleware right now are programs called Fmod and Wise. Those are the two of the big ones. And basically, they're programs that composers or the audio team uses to program the music and have it interact with the game. And sometimes this is all done by the audio team, and sometimes this is done by the composer, or sometimes it's a collaboration. And before we had middleware, I mean, I wasn't in the video game industry at that time, but I can only imagine. But you had to do things manually with code, and I can only imagine how complicated it would be. But then the middleware came along, and it's much more it makes it's a much more seamless process because you can just add tracks in, you can see what's happening with the game, you can program it, you can do these crossfades like I talked about, and a myriad of other things. And it's very user friendly for us composers as well. And so that's the another really amazing part is that instead of a composer needing to learn how to program if they want to get music in their game, they can use this middleware. And the learning curve is still pretty steep, but it's not like, off the side of a cliff steep. And you're able to get much better results in a shorter amount of time.
Any crazy challenges you've run into in terms of composing for video games? Something that was a real head scratcher, and then you came up with a out of the box solution?
I mean, the a lot of the games I'm working on right now, I leave the really complicated problems to the audio team. I will set up the middleware program so that all the beats line up, but there's some whizzes in there who really do amazing things with the programs. For me, the challenge is just writing the music, and that's complicated enough in most cases because your balance you want to keep things in the same tempo, but they need to have different vibes and different instrumentation, but the keys need to work with each other. So just the complexity of even just a normal piece of music for a linear show is already complex enough with the beats and the harmonies and stuff. But then you try writing three or four tracks on top of that that all need to work with each other, and it gets exponentially more complex. And so I think that's been the challenge is just finding these solutions for layering music. And in Nurture that there's one episode where we had this game where the player can basically make the I'm trying to remember exactly how it worked, but they can make the song faster or slower depending on what buttons they're pressing, or they can add more instruments, or they can make it pitched higher or lower. And I needed to write a piece of music that could do all that. And again, using this middleware was the way we were able to do that. And so to create that, I needed to do basically write a piece for a band, but have parts that worked in different keys
Oh,
and
wow.
different tonalities and different tempos, and were able to, stretch out and all that. And so instead of just delivering, the regular amount of stems that I would, I think I had to deliver like 16 or 20 stems just for that one little piece of music that all were unique and that the middleware was able to do. And so that was probably one of the more challenging ones, but I think it's going to turn out quite well.
So you even program it to change pitch and shift keys. That's interesting.
Yeah, you can do
What
all that. I mean, that's the magic of this middleware. And sometimes you do it in the middleware, sometimes you do it, in your writing software or just compositionally before you deliver. It just depends on the situation.
what would be the motivation in the story of the game that you would want to shift into another key?
Well, this particular game, it was just something they're climbing a mountain or something like that. And so things were getting higher, things were getting more intense, and again, just kind of that immersion, the feeling of like going
Gotcha.
up, up, up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But there's no the thing that I'm learning more and more as I'm doing more games is that there's no right way of doing one thing, and there's no clear-cut path. And when I first got into the industry, I'm like, oh, like there must be like a tried and true way of doing this, but that's not the case. You just a lot of the times, even all seasoned studios, they're figuring it out as they go in many cases, and creating finding creative solutions. Um, yeah, through the collaboration between the composers and the game designers and the people who are doing the effects. And that's why it's such a collaborative process, as opposed not as opposed to linear music, but even more so than linear music.
Right. Interesting. What about
Yeah.
instrumentation? Do video games open up the use of any odd or strange choices for for instruments? And maybe I should say non-traditional instruments. Have you ever done anything like that? Used like real life sound and turned it into your music, that kind of thing?
Oh yeah. I mean, a lot of times I'm sitting in my studio banging on like pots and pans or like twanging weird things and bringing it in. And I've done that in linear music to be fair, but in video games, especially since you get even crazier worlds in video games, you can have even more fun in many cases. So yeah, absolutely. I mean that's the fun part of being composer. And I feel like sometimes I get a bit lazy and just get stuck in the box, box meaning the computer.
Right.
And granted I do have, massive libraries, and I haven't even explored every type of sound that I've had, but I find it's important to step away from that sometimes and just do some random stuff, and go on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist and find some weird random instrument and figure out a way to do that. That's the fun of being a composer, and it brings me back to like my young teenage years when I was doing really artsy fartsy stuff. And it's important to still do that and not lose that. It's important to me at least.
Well, what do you think for young kids who are interested in composing and maybe composing for video games? What do you
Mhm.
think are the best traits that someone should have to jump into that field?
Mm. Um, I would say learning how to learn, and just being a good learner, and finding the techniques of how to learn different programs quickly, learning new instruments, because a lot of times you'll have a song that you're doing, or and you don't really have time to find a player for that flute, or that recorder or whatever it is that you're doing, and so you just got to learn it yourself. Not to say that it's not important to hire really great session musicians when it's called for it, but sometimes you don't necessarily need a virtuoso recorder player for the part. And so just learning how to be good at learning, and that's something that will serve you well not only as a composer but in many walks of life, I'd say. but especially for video games because you're learning instruments, you're learning your DAW that you're Logic or whatever DAW you're in, you're learning the middleware, you're learning how to collaborate with the other teams, and that's all just stuff that not many places actually teach you. A lot of times you just need to either learn from a mentor or learn from other people in the industry and just really take in all that knowledge.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, Trevor, before we wrap up, let the folks know how they can track you down and follow your career. I know you've got like an Instagram account, or how do people see what you're up to?
Yeah, my Instagram is Trevor Hoffmann Music. My website is the same thing, trevorhoffmanmusic.com. I like to post fun stuff on my Instagram and just talk about being an animation composer and a video game composer. They can also check out Nurture, which I believe was just nominated for a Kidscreen
Oh,
Award.
wow.
And then also Billy Bust Up, which is another video game I'm working on as an orchestrator and a mixer. And they have a lot of demos out and some YouTube clips that you can check out. And that game will be coming out next year. And you can hear a lot of these different things we've been talking about today.
Awesome. Well, Trevor, it's been fun chatting with you. And don't hang up. I want to chat just a bit when we stop recording. But thanks for joining us again. It was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, a podcast created and hosted by filmmakers Jeff Stolen and Andrew Lamping, and produced by Melody Lopez.
Our theme song was composed by Stephen D. Bennett.
Make sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us on, and stay tuned for future episodes.